Hello and welcome to Lutherans Alive. This is the program that seeks to tell the stories of Lutheran Christians and their ministries here in southwestern Pennsylvania, believing that God is doing wonderful things through us. I'm Pastor Tony Schneck, pleased to be your host on the program today with Tim Dawes. Tim happens to be a member of House of Prayer Lutheran Church in Aliquippa and is a mental health professional, works in that area. Welcome to the program today, Tim.
Thank you, Tony.
Could you say a little bit about your journey? How did you get to be where you are in the position that you're in right now as a counselor?
I had been ordained for the Catholic Church and served about 14 years in ministry there in two different parishes, in Cranberry Township and in Coriopolis, and burned out of that with funerals. My dad's family all decided to die within 1 year of each other, so every month we had another family funeral. And I had traveled from a church where there were 12 funerals a year to one where there was 180 funerals a year. So it was a lot of funerals. And during one of the ones in July, my back went out in the middle of it. So I had to finish it and get to the cemetery and get back to the house again with severe back pain. And that was just from the tension and the stress of all the grief that I was carrying for myself and for everyone else. And then I decided I needed to step away from that. So I took a leave of absence and looked for a job for a while. And then found one in mental health as part of a wraparound team, and did that for a few years, and then moved into family-based mental health where I am currently.
So as you pursued one calling, you sort of found another, so to speak, at a different time in your life. And where has that taken you now, specifically? Where is it that you serve?
I serve currently in Beaver County and work for GLADE RUN LUTHERAN SERVICES. I perform family-based mental health services in people's homes. What's necessary to get that service is a family has to have a child with a mental health diagnosis and a recommendation from a psychiatrist or a psychologist for this service. It's an intense service. Usually it's when outpatient hasn't worked. Outpatient once a week or once a month has not been effective for the family or the child to make significant improvements, and they look for something more intensive. We go into the homes as a two-person team. Sometimes things are done as a team, sometimes individually, either with one part of the family, another part of the family, the whole family. Any number of different dyads or groups could work together. And we look for the broader scope of things, that we don't try to say, well, the child is the problem and we have to fix the child. If there's a problem in the family and how the family's working, and we help families make adjustments to that. We try to follow kind of a structural family model where we look at who has the ability to make changes in the family, generally the parents. And we work with them to strengthen their role as parents in the family, whether their children are 5 or 18, 19. But to have them be the parents that maybe they got away from that in one way or another.
And it's certainly an important aspect of who we are as human beings, our emotional health, and that mental health aspect of who we are is so very important from even a very young age. And you mentioned your work with GLADE RUN, formerly Lutheran Youth and Family Services, and before that, the Lutheran Orphanage in Zelienople. It was called many, many years ago. Could you say...
Back when it was far, far away.
Indeed, indeed. Could you say maybe just a few words about the history of GLADE RUN and the campus there in Zelienople? Might be helpful for some of our viewers to know.
It started out as an orphanage and then saw that there were more needs for children and families than were being met by the society at the time, and it started to then have a residential treatment facility for children who couldn't be in their homes any longer because of their behaviors. It wasn't safe for them or their family to still reside in the home, so they started a residential treatment facility. And then the role of family-based in counseling is to prevent out-of-home placements. So we try to keep children in the home where we feel they do better. And the people that love them and care for them are related to them, rather than a foster care system or an RTF, residential treatment facility. Both of those are good and necessary parts of family mental health. but the one I work for is working with keeping families in the home. And sometimes we work with children on their way back in the home. They had been out of the home in another placement for a while and are just now returning to their parents' home and looking for an intensive service to ease that transition from something that was happening every day to something that happens a few times a week.
Certainly different situations require different types of help. Obviously, as you say, sometimes simply appointments where you come to someone's office, perhaps once a month or once a week or however often that might be. Then you spoke about the wraparound arrangement, coming to a family's home and being there and seeing how things work. And then lastly, of course, some sort of placement, whether it be a GLADE run.
Or another placement, yeah.
Or another placement. Okay, so lots of different options, but your work is mainly with the options that try to resist taking that last option of having children placed somewhere other than in their homes. So, okay. Do you find what do you find about the work that's incredibly rewarding for you?
I'm just getting to see the vast way that families interact with each other. They're so different from one another. And the first part of our work with the family is just joining with them, just getting up to speed with where they are and what they're doing. How are things? And when crises happen, how can we help them be resolved in a positive way? We don't fear crises. We see them as an opportunity, that it could come down better or worse functioning for the family. So that when a crisis happens, it's a chance to say, how do you want this time to go? In the past, maybe it's always gone toward things getting worse and escalating more and more yelling, more screaming, throwing things. How would you as parents like to see this be different, and what can you do differently in those situations that may have a different impact on your family's life and the life of your children?
And how long have you been now in this particular field and doing the work that you're doing?
About 8 years.
Okay.
There's a 3-year training program for people who do family-based mental health, and I graduated that several years ago. It's run by Western Psych.
And your work is, as you said, mainly in Beaver County.
Yeah.
And as you work with the families there, what sort of issues are you helping them through?
Communication with the school systems, communication with their own home churches, whatever that may be, whatever faith they may be practicing, trying to let that be a support to them. Some of them have gotten away from an active practice of their faith and just not trying to say you must be this or you must be that, but whatever you are, if you want to be it again or you want to practice it more, let's help you do that. We can connect with the pastors of the different churches. We can work with any system with which the family's involved, school, Boy Scouts, AA, NA, any system that the family's involved in, we can, with proper releases of course, be involved in all of those different aspects of a family's life to help people be on the same page so that everyone's saying, when this happens, try this.
Thanks for what you've shared so far. More with Tim Dawes and his work with our young people after a short break here on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Tim Dawes, a member of House of Prayer Lutheran Church, Aliquippa, and a counselor, helping young people and families in the area of mental health. As you help families, you were talking about something called family systems theory as a way that you attempt to help families, shed some light on whatever issues they might be having. Could you tell us a little bit about what family systems theory is?
It's a theory developed by Dr. Murray Bowen in his work in Topeka, Kansas, and then he moved to Georgetown to continue his work with families of the mentally ill. And he found that it wasn't generally a problem of one person in the family, it was a family systems problem that was going on, that the person with the mental health diagnosis was a symptom of what was going on in the family at large. And the definition of family is as broad as it can be. Any group that the nuclear family is involved in is a part of that family. So it would include churches or organizations in society. Anything that they're around is fodder for the work. And one of the key principles that he developed was the theory of triangles. That a dyad, a two-person relationship, can handle a certain amount of stress very well, but after a certain point it gets uncomfortable for one of the people. So often there's a third person drawn in to be the outsider. Or if I'm having trouble with you, I would call someone else in and have a relationship with them for a time that's better, and then you would be on the outside. So it's just a way to disperse the stress, like we find in many of the bridges in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of triangle shapes in there because they're very sturdy and strong. They can take a lot more stress than just a single beam can take. And his theory on that is that people work either to be in the closer part of the relationship or the further away part. If there is stress, sometimes it's more comfortable for someone to be a little bit further away from the relationship. Another part is the differentiation of self he brought up, is not to have a differentiation of self is to be able to be in a relationship with stress without having to necessarily react to it. I can be myself even if things are not going well. I don't have to then change who I am to be in a relationship with you or with anybody else. So I am myself in many different situations rather than bending to the wind in every situation. Another one is that the way that things are acted out in nuclear families and the people living in one home would be there could be marital conflict or a dysfunction in one spouse where one of them has to adapt a lot more to the other. So it's not an even, I'll do some things, you do some things. It's one does a lot and one does very little. And that becomes okay for a time, but then after a while that wears on both parties. Impairment in the children and an emotional distance is sometimes one of the results of stress in a family. Another is family projection, where people are afraid that there's something wrong with one of the children in the family, and they look at that child until they find something. They make a diagnosis in their heads, and then they treat the child as if that was the problem, when it's not, that the problem may be between the spouses, and it's being acted out with the child being targeted as you're the one then who's going to carry the stress. And none of these things are intentional. It's just the way that he saw that people acted. You know, that they took the stress that was in one relationship and kind of shoved it off to a side in another. Multi-generational things are there as well, that people with one level of differentiation of themselves tend to marry people with the same level, so that if things are going well for one person, they'll marry someone similarly balanced. And if the things are going badly in the relationship that you're in with your family, odds are you're going to end up in a relationship for your marriage or your life partner with someone with another difficult situation that they're coming from. Another is emotional cutoff, that you sometimes just deal with the relationship by not having a relationship with someone, but there's still a connection, but it's a severed one. And sibling position is also something that he brought into his theory of how families work, that oldest children tend to be leaders in any setting that they're in, and younger children tend to be followers, and middle children have a little bit of everything. But that none of these one aspects of his theory explain everything, but it's the interplay of all of them that work to direct a lot of what we do as our family. So it's not just what happened in my life today, but maybe my grandparents had stresses that came into my parents' life, that came into my life, that go into the lives of children.
Have you found that the insights from family systems theory have been helpful for different families in different ways? And as you say, might not be the same in every situation. Every situation's different, but you found the family systems helpful nonetheless.
Yes. Yes, it really works for helping families look at what their experience has been from another lens, another facet. To say that, well, oh, okay, I never really thought of that part of how I'm acting toward my child the way my dad acted toward me, and how my child, if nothing changes, will act toward their children. So we can make changes today, because this is the time that we have.
I've heard it said that every family, to a certain extent, has some issues.
Yes.
Can you say some things about that? Can you say how can family systems be helpful for every family, even though those that are watching today that might not consider themselves particularly troubled families, but that every family has issues. How can family systems be helpful for them?
It just gives you insight into your own actions and what influences are acting on you at a particular moment. One of the things that I've become involved in through my work in family-based is the Western Pennsylvania Family Center out in East Liberty, the Highland Park area. And that's a center for the study of the family. And I ended up being on the board of directors for that agency. And it just is a training center for people who work in the mental health fields to look at Dr. Bowen's theory in a way that they can then apply it to the people with whom they work, as well as in their own lives. So it's a study of the family you know best, which is your own, the one you grow up with or the one you're in currently, and how do all these different aspects of this theory impact you so that you can then work with other families and help them gain some insight into, oh, the stress from my parents' marriage and them not getting along or them having good times or bad times affected me, and then it moves on down the one generation to the next.
Being a pastor, I've heard and done some reading also in terms of family systems as it applies not just to nuclear families or families that live in homes, but also larger groups. The insights from a sociological standpoint in terms of even our congregations are subject to a certain amount of family systems theory and issues that are going on. Have you seen some of that as well as you've been a part of the church in different congregations, even different traditions in the church? Do you see it?
Yes, very much so. That the congregation is in many ways a family. So that what happens in our nuclear families happens in the larger families. And these theories are also applicable to the society at large or to any organization. Could be your office in which you work, that there are people in interplay between them, and some people being on the inside, some people being more on the outside. What happens when a new member comes into the family? How does that stress get resolved by the people who are there? So it's organizations of business, of church, of biology. Even in nature, they've found some of these same systems in effect in bee colonies and in insect or animal husbandry areas.
Tim, thanks for what you've shared so far. And we're going to take another short break and be back with more on Lutherans Alive.
All right.
Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Tim Dawes, who serves as a counselor. And we were talking about the mental health services that you're engaged in. It seems to me that there's an unfortunate stereotype of folks that deal with mental health issues. And yet here we are talking about a theory, a way that all people can be helped. All families can experience a certain amount of healing through a family systems theory that, in a sense, everybody has their issues, right? Could you say a bit about that unfortunate stereotype of those who deal with mental health issues?
If someone in your family dies or breaks a leg, the rest of the world understands completely what that's like and has a lot of understanding. Your job will give you time off to deal with those things. But if it's a mental health thing, it's not something visible. You're not wearing a cast. There's not a coffin. It's just, well, get over it kind of an attitude. In many parts of our society, there's not a parity between mental health and physical health care. So to try and bridge that gap is to look at what can be done to educate people about mental health issues, and to see that even if your family's issues don't rise to the level of a diagnosis, it may still be something that you could benefit from, is to look at how do you interact with the people that you're related to or that you work with, and to find ways to make improvements in yourself and how you can own what you're doing. What do you do that makes things better or makes things worse in the different situations in which you find yourself?
If we as Christians believe that God does desire healing for us, that God does bring healing, that this is another way that we as human beings are in need of God's healing and always have been. Could you say a few words about that, about how God is at work in this healing process?
I believe God's at work through the people that he calls to be a part of the mental health professions, whether it's psychiatric social workers or nurses or psychiatrists, psychologists, family-based counselors or wraparound staff, to work with the people who are in pain and help ease some of that pain. And that God's desire for healing is not something that should be ignored by families. If there's pain going on in your family or in your children, it should be something that should be looked at and addressed. Not something that's trying to swept under the rug as, well, we don't have those issues in our family. Every family has, to some level or another, things that go wrong, things that are stressful, things that you don't talk about.
Without breaching that important confidentiality that you have with your patients, can you say a few things about how God is a part of that conversation that you have with people, and faith as a part of our healing? Does God come up in conversations? And what about our ideas of God? Doesn't our image, the image that we have of God in our own mind, doesn't that make a difference? What we believe about God matters. How is that a part of your work?
That there are times where someone maybe had an abusive father in their life, and that father may have died, and they can no longer address their concerns or their issues to that person directly because they're not here physically to speak with. But those relationships can still be healed even though the person's not physically present any longer. You can have rituals in your life that you try to forgive them for what they did. And that the prayer that we're all taught, the Our Father, calls to mind the image of a father. And if your father was not one that you'd like to be close to, and God is Father, then you don't want to be that close to God in your life, from some people's perspective. So we try to help people heal multi-generational issues and also to heal their faith issues. And it does come up in conversation with some of the families. Sometimes it's explicit where it is a conversation that we actually have about faith and God and what do they believe and how can we help that family use its faith to strengthen and support itself. So we don't make them have any one particular faith, but whatever faith they have to try and strengthen it.
We were talking during the break about some of the biblical examples, that there are families in the Bible that had issues. The Bible is full of very wonderful heroes of faith, but they were also very, very human and had their issues. Do you want to mention a few of those?
With Joseph and his brothers seemed to have some sibling issues to work out at some point or another, as did Cain and Abel. But the families of Jesus and John the Baptizer were cousins in some traditions, and that their relationship supported each other and encouraged each other and moved each other's ministry forward. It depends on what you choose to do with the family you have. You can't choose it once you're born into it, but you can choose how you respond to it or what you do with it. And you can make changes in what you do. You're part of the family. That your choices, your words, your actions can either help things get healed or help things get worse.
We're fond of saying that no, we cannot choose our families. We're born into these families. We can choose our friends, but we can't choose our families. There's a sense in which, too, that we as Christians believe that we're connected by our baptism, and that, in fact, we can't choose, we can't pick or choose who's in the family of God and who's out, because God has chosen us by our baptism, and that we're in this together, whether we like it or not. And as you say, we need to try to figure out how to live together.
Yep. In our families, in our churches, our congregations, our businesses, wherever we are.
Important insights from the the area of family systems theory. Any words for our viewers perhaps on where they might learn more about family systems theory? It might, something perhaps that might even help their own situation in their families.
The Western Pennsylvania Family Center on Highland Avenue is one resource, as is the base service unit in Beaver County. It's Beaver County Behavioral Health is an aspect to go to if you think your family has issues that could be supported by mental health care.
Okay. Any other, what about good books that folks might pick up, or maybe a website that would have some information? Any other sort of resources that you might direct folks to?
Bible always has some good answers in it to many situations. Nothing else right now.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being on the program today. May God continue to bless your work, the work that you do, especially with the young people. They are a treasure. They are a treasure with which God has entrusted us. He's given them to us to take care of. And thank you for being a person in the community that helps to take care of the young people and their families. We pray that God would be in every home and in every heart. Thanks for what you do, Tim.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us today on Lutherans Alive. We know that from wherever you're watching, in your community or near your community, there's a Lutheran congregation that would be very pleased to welcome you. We hope that you'll come to worship with us. We hope to see you in worship, and we hope to see you next time on Lutherans Alive.